everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From the Brink. As always, hosting with me is YCT now chairman Clay Grossman. Filling in for Colby is former YCT secretary Shel Harrison, myself, Hitching Post editor-in-chief Paul Dehlinger, and today's guest is the Hitching Post new copy editor Blake Fisher. Blake is a TTU graduate with a major in advertising. Blake, how do you do?
I do well. How do you do?
I'm doing good. So congratulations on graduating this year. I guess tell us a little about that. I mean, you'll be staying here at Tech, won't you?
I will be staying here at Tech. I'm returning next semester for another undergraduate degree, which I understand is a little out of the norm. Either you go down for a master's or into grad school or just kind of move on to a job. But I'm not doing any of that. I'm coming back for another undergrad degree in journalism because I realized a little on the late side that I did not want to do advertising. But I thought I'd just finish out the degree and come back for journalism.
Well, and you told me that writing for the Hitching Post is kind of what got you interested in getting a journalism degree.
Yes, yes and no. Really, overall, what it was that I had thought towards a few other degrees, journalism being one of them, of course, and MCOM, the college. So it was kind of like writing a few articles for the Hitching Post kind of gave me an idea that I should test out before I just come back and go for journalism and realize, another semester in, maybe this isn't the one for me. And then ended up getting 2 degrees that neither one I wanted. So I started writing a few articles for the Hitching Post, just kind of dabbling into it to see if that is something I might want to come back and do. And after 2 or 3 articles, it kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say spoke to me. That kind of sounds cheesy, but it definitely was something that I really enjoyed doing. Fun is a word, but the most describable word I can think of would be that it was enjoyable to do, something that I could see myself doing for a while, or that I thoroughly enjoyed kind of looking into some research, looking at stats, numbers, people's stories, and kind of ferreting out what is going on and kind of relaying that to other people that don't have the time, ability, or even desire to look into those things in that depth so that I could do that myself, which I do enjoy doing, and then kind of give people the best summation of all that information that would help them in day-to-day life with the information that is provided.
Blake, I just thought of the most applicable term for your situation. You're not quite an undergrad anymore, and you're not a graduate student.
Is this a dad joke?
So maybe you should be called an overgrad instead of an undergrad.
Yeah, the answer is yeah, that's a dad joke.
But I guess in lieu with your career aspirations, journalism, right? I assume the route is political journalism, and then from there, do you see yourself maybe writing op-eds, written journalism, or could you see yourself going video content, maybe doing something as far off as like being the next James O'Keefe for Project Veritas? Where do you see yourself lining up in the ideal world 5 years from now?
So that's a great question. I do think it's funny. You know what they say about assuming, right?
I've heard.
This time you're actually right. Political journalism is actually kind of a direction that I've thought about going into, and is the most desirable direction for me right now, and the path that I've chosen, which is why I'm kind of happy and really enthralled actually to kind of move up and work with the Hitching Post on a more serious manner than writing an article here and there, but as copy editor. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I do appreciate that, Mr. Paul and Mr. Clay, for thinking about me and kind of asking me if I would like to step up and do that. Because
of course.
Yeah, well, thank you for writing all those articles. I think definitely Kinsey and you have been probably the most productive writers we have on staff. Kind of segueing back, I want to go into some background for our guests. So starting with Shel. So what is your political background? I get everybody who listens to the show kind of knows where me and Clay come from, but how would you describe yourselves?
I mean, just in the most simple terms, I'd probably say you're standard conservative. I'm very strong on the social policies. Unlike a lot of people, I will admit that I don't know as much about fiscal policy as a lot of conservatives would like to say they do. But pro-gun, pro-life, just standard conservatism. Small government, especially.
And just kind of going off the fact that you're filling in for Colby, I think originally I'd kind of hoped, because you were also kind of in the populist kind of mold as he is, but you said you kind of turned away from that, just during, I guess college, would you say?
Yeah, no. especially coming to Texas Tech and being exposed to more conservative ideas, I soon found out that, hey, this whole like Trump thing doesn't really align with what I'm actually about.
Like, I know for me, like, I was definitely more libertarian when I was younger, and then I started, seeing like, I mean, I think as a whole they do good things, but like, when you take it to their extreme, they're like, booing people who say like it should be illegal to sell heroin to 8-year-olds. Like, okay, well, that's where you lose me.
Oh, I actively called myself a libertarian for years like 19 to 21. It was just such a weird
I
time.
definitely did too. I
think everyone has that.
It was kind of like I was proud of myself. Like, no, I'm as far right as it gets. You think leftists are crazy? Like, not that I'm crazy, but it was very much like you super far left. I'm way over here in the right. Like, I'm in the right, pun intended. Like, that's me. And then I realized as I kind of worked my way through more college that super far libertarianism, like you said, like. Yeah. You should be able to sell heroin to 8-year-olds. Like,
well, let's not badmouth libertarians in front of our token libertarian on this. So let's let him defend himself.
As I've gotten,
I have a libertarian friend.
As I've gotten older, I have suddenly realized that I'm less and less so a libertarian in the common sense. But I think the reason for that is you have libertarianism is in a lot of ways cooler than conservatism.
It is.
You can still be socially liberal, socially progressive as you want, and still realize, the left is stupid on economics.
Yeah, well, that is kind of the meme, not to interrupt you, but the whole fiscally conservative, socially liberal, or as the left would say it, it's like, oh, I'm a conservative but not racist, that's how they kind of parody the Libertarian Party.
Well, what I used to say, I have a lot of lefty friends back home, and so I was like, hey guys, look at me, I'm cool about this social issue. Yeah, we should have this or that. It was almost like a consolation to the left instead of actual like belief system. It was me seeking approval.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, not to say like some libertarians are steadfast in like, being libertarian and not conservative, but I know definitely in like Silicon Valley, like that's the way some of them will try to get away with being conservative. It's like, well, like I'm a libertarian. Like I think there's this one guy working for Facebook, and he said he was voting for Trump, and it caused this huge storm, this media storm. And I think Mike Zuckerberg kind of forced him to say, like, well, he's actually voting for Gary Johnson. Like, Clay, were you going to add on to that?
I didn't really have much to say, but I would expect that, we're a younger generation. Most of the libertarian-minded types, I would imagine, become red-blooded conservatives in the next couple decades. It's going to be a different shade of it, though, I would argue. I don't think we'll see hardcore social conservatives moving forward.
Well, you see that
we probably wouldn't see a renege on maybe or a world where we can possibly see a renege on the Obergefell decision or that issue. That's that issue as a whole.
You're saying we'll see like pink conservatives instead of crimson, essentially.
Yeah, basically.
Well, and to that degree, I mean, because it's like, what is more conservative is always like an innocuous term. I mean, it's like like. Each group thinks like, oh, my version of conservatism is the most conservative. But I think we already kind of saw that to some degree in Trump's presidency. Now, I know some libertarians may have a lot of problems with Trump, but I mean, in the anti-war movement that became very like strong in the populist movement, that's a very libertarian principle. Now, I wish like the libertarian like ism and some of the Trump supporters also extended over to like fiscal policy, so we don't spend $7 trillion in 1 year. But I guess that's me.
Biden now, how has he spent in the last like 5 years?
Yeah, but
just as much as that in 100 days.
Exactly.
Our standard is like, wow, I mean, we spent $7 trillion, but it's okay because the next guy is going to spend way more than that. I was like, well, yeah, but I mean, we kind of set him up for like this rapidly increasing spending. But yeah, trying to get back on topic, we've talked about Shel's background. Blake, other than not being a libertarian, how else would you describe yourself?
Not being a libertarian. Maybe mirror Shel on the fact that I'm conservative. Kind of looked more into it, specifically in the last 2 years, more into what I've seen both in the media and more in reading books than it is watching the news, because as inflammatory as the news is, it just conflagrates people, and it really makes the population in and of itself explosive to the true sense of the term. I mean, you've seen that with riots constantly through Trump's presidency, death toll and homicide rising from the end of Obama's years, from what I remember reading about, all the way through Trump and even through Biden now. Homicides are rising in certain cities, obviously not across the nation. And it's interesting to me to look into those kind of things. And you look back and you read books about the Old West and the death toll and murder back then. It was high, but it was nowhere near the levels it was now. But obviously there was the increased population density that also back then it was very, very conservative in certain senses of you got your own rights, you have the ability to do what it is you feel necessary to protect yourself and your family, and it was and your land as well, and you work for it, and you work with your community, and then you go to the local government, and then you go to the federal government. Whereas nowadays it's kind of turned around from at the simplest, easiest way for people to understand the old looking back at post-Civil War time frame, 1870s to let's say 1910 roughly. Just about everyone to a degree could just walk around and carry guns. Now it also kind of slowed down from the 1890s and on. They started slowing down both provincially and then federally, and it also kind of saw the turn from more conservative, more just kind of openly like you got freedom, but you don't cross someone else's freedom. That's when you break the law. And where nowadays it's like you don't dare do anything at all in public that might hurt someone's feelings that's 65 miles away or 100,000 miles away. And it's kind of turned around. So back to the point I was trying to make is that the simplest way to look at it is that in freedoms, gun carrying is now almost extremely limited, and you have to go through the federal government to carry, where back then it was if you bought a gun, you carried it. Now you learned pretty damn quick back then whether or not you could handle it, usually by death one way or another. And then, and that's just how it was. But people back then were also incredibly responsible. So you can see the flip in the last over 150 years, or roughly 150 years, of the turn of federal government being more and more restrictive on its citizens. And as much as technology has boomed forward in the last, let's say 1960s, about 75 years, give or take, technology from the 60s till now is it's exponentially grown. And I'm not entirely sure that is due to the restrictions of the federal government, because every time something came out, then they restrict it, and every something new would come out, then they restrict it. And so from reading all that, I would say that I'm pretty strongly conservative on the fact that limited government, extremely limited government, federally, and you work with the people in your, well, you could say neighborhood, but in your community, in your local community, and grow from there. So long answer short, I'm conservative.
Okay, well, I kind of want to break down some of that. Okay, but I mean, because you said you were conservative, but I mean, you didn't really explain your specific conservative ideology. I mean, you kind of talked about radically different things were back in the 1870s. Now, to that point, it's kind of interesting you brought up the 1870s, because that is kind of when, because of like the end of slavery, that's when people started being really concerned with gun control. It was like people didn't like freed slaves having guns, and so that's where people started kind of turning their opinion on how absolute like gun rights were.
Right, but that's like I said, and as oppressive as it got real quick, it wasn't so much restrictive on guns as a community. It was actually racial, but it was not federal government restricting across the land, which I'm not saying that either way is bad or worse or better. But it was around the 1890s during the shootout at the OK Corral. Mm-hmm. That was one of the last gunfights in American history that
major gunfights.
Major gunfights among multiple people, both good and bad, whichever side you believe. There was a gang involved, the Cowboys, and then you had Wyatt Earp, which also became legendary and fictionalized just for that what happened during those couple months that year or so. And so you see really in the 1890s, from what I've read specifically, that it was more controlled across the nation, not just for slavery. Now, of course, restricting slaves, not slaves, but newly freedmen from owning guns was, of course, a step that way, which is another kind of concern of nowadays with free speech, with almost considerable public pressure or social pressure to say the right term and thing to people, whether you believe it or not. And I think just another slippery slope that could lead down towards gun control, and then, I don't know, maybe eventually speech control.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned something that I think is really important to me is like idea of subsidiary. Ideally, the problem gets handled on the most local level. Ideally, you'd work with your like community, friends and family, and extended family. Then they'd go up to like the city level, and then past that, like at some point maybe the state needs to get involved. And only at like the highest end should like the federal government be involved. And you say like a lot of people don't necessarily agree with that anymore. And I would say that's like true on both sides. Like I feel on the right, there's been a new movement to have like, your government be authoritative, like your party's in charge. And then it's really funny, like when Trump was in charge, like, and like all these states started caring about like states' rights, and not having to obey like federal laws. So it seems like both sides only kind of want to limit the federal government when they're out of power. Like maybe if we both agree, like, hey, if we shrink the government, maybe we won't have to, be mad at the federal government, every other 4 years. Like,
what? But it's supposed to be all powerful.
Yeah.
I'm in charge.
Yeah. That is kind of, I think, one of the big problems we have nowadays. One of the things I kind of want to just kind of go over some news. I kind of should have brought this up at the beginning, but after our last podcast, we had Kath Cochran on, and she talked about the Sanctuary City for the Unborn ordinance. I'm happy to report that it did pass with 62% of the vote. Congratulations, and to all the people who worked on it. I know YCT was real important in getting that pushed through, and I know there was just hundreds of volunteers that I guess blocked what for it, phone banked, and I know a lot of those were in YCT, so I think we should all be proud of that. In some other news, I wanted to bring up the thing you told me earlier with that new, was it female conservative group is it on campus or is it just in general?
Oh, yeah. I'm blanking on what the acronym actually stands for. I know the W is women, so there we have at least...
Is it NEW?
Yeah, spelled the exact way. I don't know, it does bring up, an interesting point, especially that I think the right is going to struggle with probably for the next couple decades. Do we want to go for the angle of identity politics? Do we want to have women-only conservative groups, or Hispanic-only conservative groups, or Black-only conservative groups on campus, and as a movement as a whole? But look, I can see both arguments. Go to the local level, the local municipality. The most active conservative groups are the area Republican women. Mm-hmm. The most active organization outside of Project Destiny on the ordinance was the Lubbock area Republican women. And you go to any municipality, that's the one constant. Mm-hmm. However, I can see where the other argument comes from. The argument being that we do not want to divide our movement as a whole. We do not want to be going into what the left does, which is identity politics, sort of a coalition building around that. I guess, how do y'all feel about that as a whole? Do you think that maybe having women-only movements like that is okay? What do y'all think? Just talk me through it.
I think it should be fine, to be honest with you. So this is something that the left does. They're like, all right, so we have this group. We have group X, Y, Z, right? And groups X, Y, Z aren't really based on anything other than how they were born. That's nothing really special. There's no accomplishment there. They want to add value to something that, you didn't really choose. I didn't choose to be a white guy. I mean, what's it matter, really? They're making arbitrary divisions that only serve to divide us and fracture us more as a country. And I think it should honestly be fought. Trying to adopt this tactic of theirs just is not good for the movement in the future.
And I think I'm the same way. There's a little bit of hypocrisy to it. It's affiliated with Turning Point, right?
Yes.
I mean, they're always kind of criticizing the left for identity politics, but
that's their main staple. That's their spearhead. A lot of times is Candace Owens' main speech to everything, to everywhere she goes, is identity politics bad, and Black people should not fall prey to that by the left.
Right. I mean, then we're doing it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, she kind of talks about it. It's like Black people need to get off the plantation, I think was one of her quotes. I was like, well, I mean, aren't you kind of doing the same thing by messaging specifically to Black people? Look, people, I mean, have a right to associate any way they want. But I do agree with Shel. I don't think it's particularly helpful. Now, to the point, said the most active group was the Republican women on the ordinance. If you have just a regular county Republican group, I mean, it very well may be dominated just with older women. That's very possible, and I think that's fine. But I don't think we should set up organizations specifically to cater any one specific subsection. Because, I do think it kind of weakens us in the sense that this group just has these people and we want, the other groups to be in their own group. I'm like, but why? I feel like we missed out on a lot by for one, having people meet people outside their own, normal friend group, somebody from different backgrounds you could learn something about,
Which is, that's incredibly ironic about what goes on is that one point they make is that the reason they have these separate groups they separate people into is that everyone, no matter how you were raised at all, if you have a different skin color or of a different culture, your perspective is unique. So I think it's ironic and completely wrong that they run with your ideas are unique. Your ideas are unique. Let's separate you guys in different groups and we'll go from there. That's a great team. It doesn't make sense.
Experience your own reality is something that they like to say a lot. It's just ridiculous. If you're going to, make identities, you might as well make an identity that anyone can participate. I mean, we're all Texan. Texan is an identity. That is something that can unite people.
It does very much.
Yeah.
Texas is the most unified state. I've heard this from many people. I actually had a teacher from Wyoming and one from Pennsylvania when I was in high school that said that they grew up in those states. And the main point they thought, the biggest and the funniest thing they thought when they came to Texas was how every single Texan, no matter what part of Texas you're from, west, east, north, south, northwest, southeast, middle of nowhere, I mean, no matter where you are from Texas, everyone, if you talk bad about Texas, like, hey, hold up a second, wait a minute, we're Texan.
Well, that's the thing. And it's not something that you have to be born in. I mean, I will begrudgingly let the Californians come in, and if they want to be Texans, come on in. Just be a Texan.
Right.
You're one of us now.
I mean, I would push back a little on the fact that we're the most unified state. We're forgetting we are definitely shifting to the left. So, like, I have very little in common with somebody from, I would say, Austin. But to the point, I do agree that there is a very unique thing in Texas where there's a strong sense of state pride, even from people on the left. They may, like, hate Republicans, may hate Trump, may hate, religion, but there's still something about being Texan that they hold on to that's special.
Well, even the Beto people love Whataburger.
Probably the best example. Like, never been to In-N-Out, but just know that they don't like In-N-Out because people who like In-N-Out think they're better than Whataburger, and we have to make sure they know that that's not true.
Let me correct myself. What I meant was that Texas is the most unified, not by general people, but I mean over the Texas pride. Everyone from Texas, no matter. If that wasn't clear, then I apologize. But that's what I was intending, is that you got people from Wyoming, and like I said, I had a teacher in high school from Pennsylvania, and that was one of the first things he noticed was that everyone from Texas, no matter where you are from Texas, you have state pride and national and United States, you have national pride, but like you have your state pride. Where something you said that having lived in other states and all that, that's not as strong or even present much at all in most other states.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I think that's one thing people, especially on the left, are kind of forgetting. Like, they've made this thing where, like, oh, nationalism is bad. Like, well, nationalism can be bad if your nation does bad things. But, I mean, the idea that there's something that unifies a wide, swath of people. I mean, the term, like, a nation of immigrants is a true term. Nobody's ethnically American. You just become American. Like, people in Germany or in England, or, like, you're German or you're, like, an immigrant. It doesn't really matter how, like, far back your family came here. You're just never really going to be a German. But in America, you can basically come here from Southeast Asia, North Africa, it doesn't really matter where, and just be an American. Like, and I think that's something that, comes from, like, national pride, where we all, think that there's this one thing that unites us, that we're from this country or this state, and we take pride in that. And I think the fact that the left has kind of turned its back on that is, I think it's kind of destructive, because, I feel like it's kind of breaking us apart, where you don't even all agree that this country is good. It doesn't mean, the country hasn't done bad things in the past. Doesn't mean it's not, or it doesn't mean it's perfect. It just, means overall the country is good.
Well, that's evidently clear with the first term of Obama's presidency. Before Obama was elected president, before he announced his campaign to run, America was at its most unified. Now you can also attribute that to 9/11 and to a lot of the wars that were going on across the seas. But as unified as the United States was at the time, Obama ran on a change that you can believe in, and it very much started to break apart America on the sense that some people did not want him to be president for the very reason that they didn't like his policies. They didn't want him to be president. They didn't like his policies. They didn't like the direction he was going. Maybe they just didn't like the Democratic Party in general, and that's why they didn't vote for him. A lot of Democrats, not even Democrats, a lot of Republicans as well, maybe they liked his policies as well, but it was another whole factor of like, hey, first black president, we need this as Americans. This should have already happened. This is going to be amazing. We're doing it. And it happened, and it very much broke apart America, or at least fractured it to a sense that after his first election, if you didn't vote for him, it was because you didn't want a black president or you were racist. And
I'll actually push back on that. I think it wasn't the first term. I think it was the second term. Not to date myself, but I was old enough to remember the 2008 election. I didn't get to vote in that one, but I do remember it.
I do too, and I
also do. I'm
just
not that young.
Look. This is all this is during basically the coming of age for all of us, going into like being preteens and whatnot.
Right.
I feel like Obama was pushed. I mean, I was going to school in Lubbock at the time, and to a lot of my classmates, it was way more important the color of his skin than the content of his ideas. I mean, Martin Luther King is just rolling in his grave at that point.
Well, I mean, to that point, though, with like America's racial history, I don't think it's unrealistic for some people to be like, oh, I think that's a huge milestone to elect a black president. But I also don't think people kind of knew that was coming. Like Bush's presidency, I think he left office with like a 26% approval rating. And McCain was, a lot of people on the right didn't even like McCain. So,
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that one actually fits. Like when people start calling like Romney or Ryan, I was like, okay, well, you just mean like Trump doesn't like him. Those are not the same thing. But I mean, Obama ran in 2008 as a very unifying figure. Some of you look at his speeches, like no red state, no blue state. The fact that he was black is there, but it wasn't a particularly divisive message. I mean, of course, you did have some people saying like, oh, you're just not voting for him because he's black. But there was also people, before he got elected, that were saying he's the Antichrist. So, you have nuts on each side.
I do remember that.
Yeah, so
and that was like terrifying.
I had people when I was in Georgia over a summer, 2 summers ago, talking about how Trump was the Antichrist.
Yeah.
So I mean,
so there's nuts.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's not a key factor into some parts. No matter how small, there's going to be crazy people on one side saying that he's the absolute worst and America's now going to end, and then people saying that he is in fact the savior of mankind. America will now prosper like never before. And those numbers are probably much less substantial than the percentage of people that either like, dislike, or just are neutral about the president either way.
Yeah.
They're just the ones that are usually louder because they get more ratings one way or another with TV, radio, newspaper, whatever it is.
I got this idea from Ben Shapiro. He kind of talked about what really, when it did start turning, was the 2012 election, because he didn't have as broad of support, so he had to hone in on where his support was coming from, and so there started being the talk about people who are criticizing me are racist. I don't know if he directly said that, but I mean, that was definitely the implication. I remember calling him a communist was considered a dog whistle. It's like, really, it could just because you think he's kind of moving the country to the left.
Well, this was only made worse by the whole birther movement.
That's true. Yeah, that really did undermine people on the right. Well, but I mean, to that point, both Romney and McCain were like, no, I'm not gonna feed into that. Trump, on the other hand, was like, no, I've sent people to Hawaii and you won't believe what they found. And what did they found? Like, they didn't find anything. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of disgusting on both sides, the fact that people were doing it. But I mean, yeah, like the BLM stuff, and a more responsible president than Obama would have handled it with more tact, but instead went into it and started co-opting BLM to boost his numbers, and it's just like
we all know Trump is a bull in a china shop. No one that's ever in their right mind ever considered anything other than that. That was very much what his shtick was, and that's also what woke a lot of people be like, hey, you know what? Someone that's not going to just steadily walk on eggshells for the sake of wanting the office, I'll vote for him. And obviously, again, there's multiple different factors.
So when I was a young 18-year-old, I mean, that was my whole appeal to Trump. It's like, I'll vote for a sledgehammer. I mean, I'm just sick and tired of things not happening, and that was the appeal to Trump.
Right.
He was an unknown entity, and there was this promise of things are going to change. Our politicians will be more respectful, more accountable, more drain the swamp.
Right.
Did not happen, and
so
we just got
$12 trillion later.
Yeah.
But to be fair, we didn't get Hillary Clinton in office. So there's always that positive.
Yeah.
But she's probably the most unlikable American politician. I mean,
yeah,
it is impressive. Yeah, it is impressive how much everyone dislikes her.
Yeah, she would have lost no matter who, really.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting segue, since we're kind of just talking about 2012 election, kind of going into maybe Biden's presidency, because I think even looking at it objectively, Obama's presidency is already to the right of Biden. Biden is by far the furthest left president we've had since probably FDR. So let's kind of start with Clay. What do you
mean by left by FDR? Because FDR, he was more financially or economically on the left, where Biden seems to be just...
That's why I said since FDR. I think...
I would even argue that Biden's more left than FDR. Maybe not financially.
We haven't got a New Deal yet.
All right, let's tamp it down. Let's let Clay respond, and then we'll kind of see what your issue with...
Well, I think one of the easiest ways to codify left and right is how expansionist they are with the government. And so I would definitely argue that Biden has been one of the furthest left presidents since FDR, even if FDR was more fiscally conservative for his era, although he did definitely run up some deficits. there was definitely an expansionist mindset for that era because of the Great Depression. But to the question, though, Paul, yeah, definitely. It comes back to the era. It comes back to the Congress. Look, when Obama came in, there was definitely a blue dog contingent of the Democratic Party. And now, what remains of that? Is it Joe Manchin, Henry Cuellar from South Texas?
Maybe Kristen Sinema. Maybe. I mean, she plays both sides.
Yeah, and watch how much that helps her in her Arizona Senate race here in a couple.
I think it could. I'll be honest with you. It went over moderates.
I agree. I'm not sure about that because best case scenario, she wins in a costly primary. Worst case scenario, she loses to a radical in that primary because she played the middle. But again, we can talk about Kristen Sinema at any point. But yeah, there's definitely, and I would definitely say there's a movement amongst liberals, amongst Democrats, that the change that they were looking for has become increasingly radical. And radical in a sense that they want a larger government. There's no care for fiscal responsibility. That's been thrown out the window. And they're willing to embrace the furthest off position on social issues, whereas that would have been almost unthinkable less than a decade ago.
Yeah.
So them saying, let's embrace all of this gun reform that Biden's been pushing through. Or for instance, the radical abortion bills that we've seen put out, mostly in state legislatures, right? Now, the question that I would have, almost I want to ask y'all as a follow-up, is it was the root of this ideological shift more rooted in Obama, right? The transition that he took us, or was it more rooted in Trump? Trump being, on his own a hammer, definitely someone who's willing to push the buttons to the left. Was it Obama who transitioned the Democrats to where they are today, or was it Trump who further escalated them into being as radical as they are?
So I want to say neither, actually.
Interesting.
My whole thing is I feel like this seed was planted way back when in the 60s when everything started getting weird. As soon as the left took over education, we started seeing weird things. Now, that's not to say that Obama didn't embolden them, and then just Trump made it worse because he just salted their wounds. And, Trump is the greatest at getting Democrat voters to turn out.
On the libs.
Yeah. But I feel like that we can't place this really on one man. It's just part of how the left just wormed its way into education and made a bunch of professionals that align with them, and then they got it further and further.
Would you at least acknowledge that there has been a graduated increase?
Oh,
in this
for sure. Yeah, no, I did say emboldened. I just, I wouldn't pin the blame on them.
Yeah, I would probably agree with the way Shel described it. I mean, I would say that Obama, I think, shifted the party to the left. And usually the check on that would be you lose an election. I mean, people forget there was some pretty left-wing, candidates that ran. I mean, Carter only won because Nixon had to resign because he would have been impeached. But yeah, I mean, both Mondale and who's the person that Bush ran against? Dukakis. Yeah, they got swamped by Reagan and Bush. I mean, we're talking about 400 something, 500 electoral vote landslides. So that's usually the check when the party goes too left. Well, what happened? Like, you got Trump. He was able to squeeze a victory in through Hillary Clinton because people hate her. Well, you allow the left to be as crazy as they want to and still win the election. So I am of the opinion, I know there's more doom and gloom people in YCT, but yeah, I think ideally if Trump doesn't, get too involved with the party again, there's going to be a backlash to the left moving this far and this fast. And I think, we could see a pretty big landslide. Now, we're not going to see any like 400, electoral vote landslide, but I could see like
Street Fitty.
Tree Fitty. I mean, who do we all kind of assume would be the best candidate? DeSantis. If DeSantis runs in 2024 and we all play our cards right, we don't embrace the QAnon people, we kind of tamp down the stop the steal stuff, I could see us, with the a 350, 360 electoral landslide. I think we could pick up like all the swing states. I think we could, get Nevada back. I think, Virginia's even in play. Like if you had somebody competent enough.
Really?
I think it's possible.
See, I think with the growth of the Richmond metro area and how big DC has just gotten as a political entity, I don't think the population is not the same as it was in 2000.
No, it's not.
It was heavily rural based and suburban based. Where back when the GOP was getting legitimately 60-40 splits on suburbs.
Yeah.
I think the population has just shifted too much, though. It's gotten much more urbanized, where Virginia might not be in play, even in the best case scenario. But I'm right with you. I think Nevada definitely in play. We look at the states that Trump shockingly lost. Arizona, not so much, but Georgia. I think Georgia would definitely be one. When Joe Biden is carrying suburbs that George Bush legitimately won by 40 points in his 2004 re-election campaign, that's when you know that A, things have shifted, but B, there's cause to be concerned there, and a shift that's taken place over 16 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the scariest things, so, like, I think Q Hugh had mentioned this, like, if Bush had won the same proportion of the white vote as Trump did, he would have won California. So that kind of just tells you, like, how people always think, like, there's just no way we're going to get minority votes. I don't really think it's that impossible. Like, Bush was, like, 47% of Hispanic votes. I don't think it's that impossible. And people forget, like, the Hispanic vote, Democrat voters are more conservative than, like, white college-educated voters. Like, those are really, like, where you think of the most wacky stuff. Some of the stuff we complain about. If you asked your average Democrat voter, they'd probably be like, wait, what? What is, I don't know anything about that. I just like donkey good, elephant bad, But
blue no matter who.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, you get into some of the stuff, they'd be like, oh yeah, that is a little weird, but it's okay because Trump's Hitler, so I have to vote blue. Right. But yeah, when that threat is gone, people will start being a little more skeptical. I think one section we're going to make big gains in is business owners. People are like, yeah, I can't hire people because the government's paying them to not work. People just want, might want something different. So I think there's a big chance for the GOP to make big pickups in 2022 and definitely 2024. But if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so one, I do appreciate the positive outlook you have on that, because when it comes down to it, a lot of people obviously don't have that outlook. It's very much, Obama pushed the left further left. Trump galvanized them because the way he acted. He might have brought out a lot of those conservative voters for the fact that he was the bull in the China shop that we said earlier, but that also galvanized all the left to not even consider coming back towards the middle ground, where, like as you said earlier too, you kind of have presidency-wise a swing back and forth. Democrat, Republican, whether it's Democrat, Republican, whatever it is. There's usually kind of a swing back and forth in it, and I do appreciate fully the positivity that you have in that will be the case, because it's interesting to see what's going on now. Maybe in my mind, I wasn't obviously alive in the 60s or the 70s.
Couldn't tell.
Surprise. I moisturize every night, but I was. No, what's surprising is that the doom and gloom that a lot of people are experiencing now kind of was similar to that in the 70s. The next generation's failing us. The government is not doing anything responsible. The world's coming to an end. We have Vietnam. Geez Louise, the world's coming to an end. And we got something very similar going on now. As we can see, after the 70s, 80s were a pretty good time frame.
Yeah.
The 90s were actually really fantastic.
Tech boom.
Exactly. Then we have the early 2000s.
Well, the 2020s aren't off to a great start, but I would like to be optimistic.
Right, yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is that Paul's doing a great job of that, is that he's taking into account that something that a lot of people our age don't ever think about, and a lot of people, like my parents have even talked about this, is that people our age don't necessarily think about it. And to be fair, we didn't live through that, or we didn't even a lot of times study it too in-depthly in school, is that this is not the first time something radical has happened, federally or governmentally or in the nation. I mean, it happens every couple every generation, every other generation, whatever you want to say, and that generally, from what we've seen, even in history, let's say from the start of America to now, we've only gotten better. Yeah. There's been side tracks, there's been roads we should not have gone down. We've not been perfect. There have been times where we haven't been great, but we've been good. We've worked at it. We've gotten better. We've made legislation that's made it better for people in the nation, and therefore, by making it better for individuals and people of the nation, made it better for the nation as a whole. And so that is one thing that every time we talk about this, Paul, which I think is like 3 or 4 times now, about this certain facet of where we are now, is that I do appreciate that positivity you have. It is really easy. That's clear in all of social media. It's really easy just to focus on the negative, harp on it, and blame someone else for it. That is one thing I really appreciate about you. Like, is that, hey, I do agree with you on that, by the way. That was my whole point. I agree with you that it will swing back.
So I appreciate that you like that, but I think you misconstrued my point. I just said that Republicans will start winning. I didn't say things were going to get better in the 2020s.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, look, I think there will be Republicans.
I retract my statement now.
No, I mean, look, things will eventually get better. But yeah, I do think we're in for hard times ahead. But I think that's why people start electing Republicans, not because they even start liking Republicans more, just because they're like, oh, at some point, people will not want to buy our bonds. And so we will literally have to cut spending regardless. Now, in the Democrats' defense, the Republicans haven't been great on this issue, but they're the only ones at least pretending to care. So, I mean, that pretending to care turns into forced to care.
So, with all that said, I'm curious what the table thinks. So, looking to 2024, without Trump, say there's some miracle and he doesn't decide to run again, how are we going to fare in the Rust Belt without that populist element? I know it was a hard-fought battle even with him, but do we see room for improvement, or do we see it as just a lost cause?
I do think there's room for improvement. I mean, one, I know nobody likes Joe Biden here, but I think we forget that there is an appeal that a lot of working class people had with Joe Biden. Now, you can argue whether it's BS or not, but they do kind of relate to him as like, yeah, he's kind of like, he grew up working class like me. He doesn't tell me I'm a bad person. I would vote for him. At the same time, I don't think a Kamala Harris or a Ocasio-Cortez is going to get that same kind of union support with people in Michigan or Pennsylvania. I think, Biden was that miracle kind of can work both sides.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Scranton. So
well,
no,
yeah. Well, he rides the Amtrak every day. Well, and I think people also forget this, though. Don't quote me on this. But I know there's one in the Rust Belt state, but Trump won it. I think it was Michigan. He won Michigan, but he had less votes in it than Romney did in 2012. So it's not always just that there's this huge surge of support. It's just you win over X amount of moderates.
Yeah. He did actually have 100,000 more. I'm looking at the numbers right now.
So,
but the thing is, Hillary Clinton had 300,000 less votes
than Obama
did.
Yeah.
So that was the real difference maker. I can see us coming back and being real competitive in the Senate race, and in the presidential race. Look at the Senate race. John James, in a really bad year, 2018, we were one of the states.
4 or 5 points.
It was a lot closer than a lot of the pundits had.
And against an incumbent.
Yeah, against an incumbent. So there is definitely a lot of leeway there. I could definitely see someone who, similar to what we talked about with Biden, who can kind of thread the needle a little bit, a Ron DeSantis candidate, who sort of has a young, moderate appeal, definitely can go into the suburbs and speak to suburban issues. And then, someone who can, like Trump, but he also has a populist edge to him, where I wouldn't think anyone would deny that, where he's passionate on social issues and definitely takes more of the Trump economic view. I could definitely see a Ron DeSantis type figure, even other GOP candidates realistically going into Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, okay, I do want to correct myself. I looked it up. It was 2004. Bush got 2.3 million votes and lost Michigan. Trump in 2016 got 2.2 million and won it. Wow. So, yeah, it's not always just like Trump got all these Rust Belt voters out. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some, union voters he definitely galvanized, but there's also moderates that he scared off. I think we kind of forget the largest political group is unaffiliated. It's not. It's not. It's people who may vote but may not. If we can just convince the side that the other side is worse, we can win it. And I think a DeSantis would be good at that. I mean, honestly, I think most Republicans would find it pretty easy to do that. Now the problem is now there's a certain section of Republicans who will consider anybody who is anti-Trump to be a traitor. And that's what we have to deal with.
The Don Father takes over.
The Don Father. Let's coin that. Yeah. That being said, I wouldn't like this, but if they want some kind of political concession, fine, let the Trumps be another political dynasties. You got the Kennedys, they're still kicking. You got the Bushes.
Look, I'm not gonna sit around and watch Trump Jr. run or Ivanka. It's no, I'm gonna push back on this.
Oh, I mean, I'd be against it, but if they don't screw us in 2024, and they just keep shut, tell people to vote, then yeah, Melania, let her run for something in Florida. I don't care. Don Jr., sure, why not? Be lieutenant governor. Who knows? I just don't want them to mess this up because everything is saying up for this. And I was under the impression after COVID's kind of waned, there'd just be an explosion of growth. I mean, there was everybody had savings, everybody were ready to spend, but the Obama administration has been so incompetent with this. A lot of Democratic states haven't ended lockdowns. And we're
said Obama.
Oh, I meant Biden.
Sorry,
that was a Biden moment. But yeah, they've been so irresponsible with this. They're flooding the country with so much stimulus. Now, I don't think there's going to be hyperinflation like some people think. I mean, I think that's a little ridiculous. But yeah, there's going to start being some inflation. There's going to be some problems with this, and at some point, it's going to get harder to sustain our debt. And at some point, they will probably have to raise taxes. And I know they just want to say they want to raise taxes on the rich. Well, statistically, you really can't do that. So we're going to start pushing into the middle class. And when that starts happening...
Well, the rich already pay, 60% of the tax?
Yeah, I think so the top 1% pays, I think, 60% of, the income tax.
Yeah. So
but
you can only keep raising taxes on them for so long without...
Yeah, and...
You're right. It's going to have to...
That's another point. People are like, oh, yeah, we want a Denmark or a Norway-style welfare state. I was like, okay, well, then you have to pay Norway-style taxes. Yeah. But nobody wants to do that. That means, people kind of forget, we have a pretty progressive tax system where the largest burden is on the rich. Well, in Norway, everybody pays a lot of taxes. And then you can argue you get a lot of services. Okay, but you still have to pay middle class people 60% income taxes. Even Democrats, when they hear middle class person pays 60% income tax, whoa, excuse me?
Hey, wait a minute.
Wait, I'm in the middle class. I don't want to do that. I want Bill Gates to pay that, but not me. So yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna have a lot of things that bode well in 2022 and 2024. The best thing we can do is try to tamp down some of the crazies in our own party. There's no way around this. If you're a QAnon supporter, you probably shouldn't be in Congress. That seems uncontroversial to me.
That is, yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I think the left's unfair when they act oh yeah, the party is just the party. The Republicans are the party of Trump and QAnon. No, that's ridiculous. Yeah. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to say, if you believe Pizzagate or QAnon, okay, well, you're wrong.
Wait, you don't believe in Pizzagate?
And that may even mean us having to part ways with some legislators that we really like.
Yeah.
I mean, case in point, we all like Kyle Biederman and a lot of the legislation that he puts out, and the fact that he's not willing to toe the party line.
Yeah.
But I mean, come on, man, you're going to endorse legislation that makes it so we could have a vote in the Texas House to secede from the United States.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Yeah,
there's some points where it's we want to have these great legislators that are going to fight for social issues, fight for fiscal conservatism, and not toe the party line. But we also don't want to have these elected officials that are making us lose things nationally. I mean, Who's that lady from Georgia, Marjorie
Taylor Greene? Yeah,
Marjorie
great example.
Someone like that, someone like Kyle Biederman, who we may like.
I don't want to compare those two because I think even Kyle Biederman knows, that's never going to happen, but he's just pushing it anyways. Yeah, the kind of crazy that Marjorie Taylor Greene was in her. Exactly.
That looks good to Texas for himself.
And we all kind of oh yeah, the Lone Star Republic. We were our own country at one point, but I don't think we should secede. And also the fact that thinking that it could get passed, people forget, I brought this up earlier. Trump won Texas by 6 points. I don't know why you'd assume every Republican would vote to secede. Some of the people in my own party are what? I'm going to shoot U.S. troops because we're on the same side? That's not going to happen. I'm not going to work with some of the old people in my party to leave the union. No. So it's kind of a ridiculous thing.
It's just a childish thing.
It is.
If Texas leaves, the rest of the GOP, the rest of the red states realize, hey, wait a minute, we can't win another election. And so then we damn them all to civil war.
Yeah, I mean,
there's no peaceful exit.
That's the big brain play. Maybe the left lets us leave. Yeah, no problem. And then they just control the rest of the country. But I do think we got to a good point about some of how we all feel about Joe Biden. Now, I will say this: I think the right has gotten to the same trap the left did, where they're oh, everything Trump does is bad. So we're oh, everything that's bad is Biden's fault. I did start noticing people were blaming Biden for things that just objectively weren't his fault. We can all be mad about, was it the Dakota XL pipeline? I think that was
Keystone.
Keystone. It's in Dakota, right? But yeah.
It goes
through.
But yeah, that's not why gas prices started going up, and not even a little bit.
No, they couldn't. With how fast he shut down, the turnaround for how fast gas prices raised was not feasible. It's not possible because it was within a week or two that.
Well, it was a continuation of a trend. People forget, that's COVID, because of COVID, I actually saw gas at $1.39. It almost got to $1. Now, once some of the lockdowns started ended, which I think we would all agree is a good thing, the price started going up. I mean, you don't want the price of gas to be $1.30 because that's kind of a sign that the economy is not doing great. Now, I think there could be a lot of things the Biden administration does that, causes, gas prices to rise and oil prices, but we haven't necessarily seen them yet. Now, if they start throwing on a whole bunch of regulations to fracking, that will have an inverse impact on that. But right. I don't think we just don't want to turn into MSNBC where it's like, oh, Biden bad because bad things happen and I don't like Biden. Right. Like, well, let's look at his policies and show where they're wrong. Another example, I think something we've rightly criticized him for is kind of the way he handled the Uyghur genocide. He's like, well, that's their culture. It's like, what? Genocide's their culture? Like no.
Well, that's something that we as YCT members pride ourselves on is the fact that we have the ability to look at both Democrats and Republicans in office and look at their actions and judge them on the actions themselves, not on the party they affiliate themselves with, whether it is Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or Green, whatever the parties they affiliate with themselves with. If they do something good, like you said, we should reward and praise them for what they've done good. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. When they do something bad, no matter who it is, we decry it because it should not be.
I think a good example is I think we were all supportive of Joe Biden mentioning the Armenian genocide. They finally declared. Yeah, right. That's a good call.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So just because
it's not just the fact that he announced it to us; it's the fact that America announced it to the world. That is a much bigger standard, and it's something a lot of people also, I don't think really think about, is that you see Biden say, "Hey, that's a bad thing. They killed a bunch of our, the Armenian genocide. It's bad." You're like, all right, yeah, we already knew that. Thanks, Biden. But it's the fact that he announced that. He denounced that on the global stage, and America is still a powerhouse around the world, still top up there. Like when they say something, when we say something, it is very much like, okay, the rest of the world's not listening now.
Well, and the problem is you can get away with it with Turkey. It's a regional power, but it's a middle tilt power, globally. Very few politicians, left or right, at least when they're president, are going to be willing to stuff that really ticks off China. When did Trump and the Trump administration really start talking about the Uyghur genocide? Oh, well, after the second trade deal fell through. Okay, well, this isn't happening. Well, we can go after this. I think it's great we're doing it, but I am a little skeptical of on the right. How many people started caring about it only after that trade deal fell through. So we have to be consistent. We have to care about these things because they're right and not just because they're politically convenient.
No, that is absolutely the truth of it. I mean, I've ever since high school, I've kind of followed China news. It was I wouldn't call it a bad habit because I was staying informed, but it wasn't particularly helpful to anything else. But just the whole kowtowing to China, to use one of their terms that they used in their history, doing whatever they needed so that you could get your business interest. That's not a good thing. I mean, we have. Ever since Bill Clinton, we've opened up business to China, and that has not benefited the world in any way.
It started with, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it started with Nixon, and then it definitely exploded clearly just because they were growing rapidly. I will say, just kind of you brought up kowtowing to China. I mean, I'm really glad that people on the right were really mad at Disney for canceling Tina Carano, but at the same time, they also worked with a government that's committing a genocide, and they filmed in that same province, and we were less mad about that. Shouldn't that have been the real thing? We're hey, that's really bad.
You shouldn't be filming in Xinjiang.
They have point of the actors. It's those movies. They pan right, and the genocide's 30 feet away, but it's just out of camera view.
No, but we got to have that live action remake of Mulan. I mean,
it's so funny because it didn't even do that well. So it's just you sold your soul to the devil for and you didn't even
nothing.
Let's get have Mushu or Wushu, whatever the dragon's name was.
We're kind of going on a tangent, but I think people are kind of tired with just the live action remakes. I mean, millennials do run off nostalgia. Don't get me wrong, but they're just I've already seen enough live action remakes, and
I'm tired of sequels and remakes.
And plus it's we're taking a progressive angle on everything, so people if you're on the right in the millennials, which is a smaller group, but you're still I don't want to watch this SJW propaganda, and then on the other side, people who are non-political are just another remake. I may watch it on streaming or when it comes out on DVD, but I'm not going to go see a movie for it.
No.
Well, I mean, I think we've gone on pretty long, but I would like to ask both Shel and Blake, the rest of us already answered this question. Who do you see winning the Republican nomination in 2024?
If you talked to me 6 months ago, I would have said who's Ron DeSantis? It's probably Ron DeSantis or Ted Cruz.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. All right.
I'd like to see a Ted Cruz, but I don't think it's as possible. But it would be nice.
Okay.
So this is something that I've thought about ever since they kind of brought up Kamala Harris. Is I think that
for the Republican nomination?
that's right. But
So that's a left field one.
When she came very far left field. No, but ever since Kamala Harris kind of brought up as a VP nomination and all that jazz, now she's VP, go team. I've always thought it'd be really cool and kind of a neat little sardonic wink to the Democratic Party if we had Nikki Haley.
I'd
An
like to see
Indian
Nikki
woman
Haley.
as president. That would be like, hey, Democrats, you have to vote for her now because she's not only a woman president but also a minority president. If you don't, then everything you've said in the last 20 years.
You're right, because right now, after Obama running, Tim Scott would not be enough.
Yeah,
Which is
I
crazy.
really think Nikki Haley, governor of South Carolina, and then she was the UN ambassador. I really think that she not only, and I read one of her books a couple months ago, and it's compelling. I really think that if she ran and she had a Republican backing, I really think that she would be a win for us.
This is more support for my DeSantis Haley ticket because DeSantis would be the first Italian American president ever elected.
Interesting.
It's a win-win.
So we get the other one.
Yeah, I know. If you would ask me a year ago, I'd be like, yeah, I could see Democrats nominating Governor Cuomo. Not so much anymore. His chances of being president have probably bottomed out.
The Democratic ticket probably involves Kamala in some way.
See, I'm a little more skeptical of that than you are. Oh, yeah. I mean,
so as their enemy, I would like to see a Kamala on there.
Yeah, because
Kamala's a horrible politician. She's got the whole Hillary Clinton thing going.
Oh, yeah.
She has the dead behind the eyes, fake laugh,
exactly.
thing going on.
The Wicked Witch of the West
cackle.
Coast cackle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, I know a lot of people assume Biden's not going to make through his first presidency or his first term. That's very possible, but it's also possible he does, and so she's just the VP running. Because I don't think he'll run again. I'm pretty sure about.
Yeah,
but
I don't think he has the mental ability to. So I would agree with you. I don't think he has the mental ability.
Well, I do like to push back on the people who look, he's not where he should be as president, but probably neither was Reagan during the end of his second term. But people put themselves in a hole. Like they did it during that first debate. They're like, oh, Biden can't even string a sentence together. What does he do? Strings one sentence together. Yeah. Destroys Trump in debate. It's like the
whole thought going into that is
I'm not saying
Trump couldn't make a sentence.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he couldn't. I'm not saying that he is mentally unstable and should never have, because I'm not saying that he's deficient anyway. I'm saying that I don't think that
it's a huge strain on him.
If you see the stress, physical stress that is linked to the presidency, looking at from Obama 2008, 2012, he looks like he's aged 20 years, 25 years, basically. 8 years.
There's a funny thing.
He was in his 40s when he started.
The only president who hasn't seemed to age dramatically was Trump because he was already so old.
Well, yeah, but that's because everything else was painted on.
But was it Bush, 2000 to 2008? Obama's is the worst just because his hair goes from being black to gray. It's man.
Well, you can even see dyeing your hair,
spray paint, dyeing your hair. It's great.
Great, the best.
You love it.
Well, Clay, do you want to end us with anything? Do you have any last statements?
I'll say this much. Blake, where do you see the Hitching Post going? As a movement, as a paper? What do you want to say your general goal is going to be for next semester?
Okay. Well, what we've talked about is that we plan on moving towards printed paper. And I do think you and I kind of, I don't want to say disagree. I feel like you're a bit more ambitious than I am in the sense that you want paper by next semester. I know we talked about that, and it's probably more realistic to shoot for the semester after, for the spring semester, and that's kind of what I was thinking, that if we build up this next semester for video, for more articles, both political and apolitical, that this next semester is more for growth. With this past semester, the one that we're finishing up now, was meant to take it off the ground, to get it running, to make sure its legs are underneath it so that it can run by itself, and next semester will be the one where we get in the weight room and we knock it out. We work towards interviews, maybe our own podcast, maybe another podcast, or working on video interviews with people on campus, those off campus, those in Lubbock, and building it up that way so that it's more viable both on campus and off campus, so that when we start print, it's not just on campus. You have the Daily Tour Reader, and not to bash it, obviously, but how many people do you see sitting down and reading that? in print. Not very many.
Oh, almost none.
Right.
I mean,
you see it. It's just
pre-COVID, you used to walk past all of the little booths. It was stacks of it. And I would just walk past it myself. But one engineering student is not like the thing you take it off because it was like, oh, I got to take this test. But
right. Well, but in MCOM, I try to get the Daily Tour reader as often as I can for the very fact that it's informative one way or another, not just in the articles they read, but in the way that they go about distributing, the way they go about interviewing, the way they go about putting the paper together. Everything about it is interesting to me, which is another reason why I also was interested in journalism before I started writing for the Hitching Post. But I am one of the few students that I know, actually I'm probably one of the only students that I know, and I actually reads the paper. And even then, it's interesting to me. So I want to build the Hitching Post up before we start sinking money into paper. Newspapers nationwide have gone down a substantial amount in the last 15 to 20 years in readership, but online has shot up almost double the amount in the last I think the last 10 to 15 years. So it's really interesting to me that as much as paper is a hard commodity and is very much a source you want to go after, I think building it up online to where its reach is far more further, more versatile than it would be on print and paper. I think it's best that we start with that and then work our way up to where we have the ability to spend the money on newspaper and promulgate it that way afterwards. Yeah. So basically I want to build up the publication online before we start building into something more permanent.
Yeah. Well, y'all heard it here first. Big plans, podcasts. If we
podcasts, videos, live interviews.
Yeah, man, sit down for Blake's one-on-one interview with presidential candidate Ron DeSantis next year.
That's right. In 6 to 8 months, I'll be interviewing him. I already emailed him yesterday.
As the Mount Rushmore of the Hitching Post is you 4 times if you can land, you can land that. But I think that's a good stopping point. I want to thank our 2 guests, Shel Harrison and Blake Fisher, for coming on. I want to thank Anchor and Intercollegiate Studies Institute and our sound editor, Bre Brown. Please like and subscribe and share this with all your friends and family. This has been From the Brink.